All right, guys, welcome back. Let's go ahead and move into the lab portion of Tuesday. This is one of the reasons why I really like to and mandate that my lectures, I also do the labs. As you guys know, for those of you that had Bio 210, where you had two different professors, one that taught lecture and one that taught lab, it's a lot better, in my opinion, when you have a professor that teaches both, because I know exactly what I covered in lecture when we get over here to the lab side. If I have someone else teaching lab, they don't know what I taught and what I covered in detail and how thoroughly I covered it in lecture. So they cover everything, assuming that you know nothing about it. Okay, so it tends to elongate the time that you need to spend in labs. So that's why when our labs run a little bit shorter, it's because I've already covered this content in detail, and I know that I've covered it in detail already in lecture. Okay, so that's why, again, we're going to always hit on all the essentials, and I'm going to always narrow your focus and share with you what to focus on for the lab quizzes. But again, there's no sense in holding you here for time to say exactly what I just said. Okay? All right. So let's go ahead and recap what the lab is all about. Okay, the lab quiz. And again, we're going to finish. As you know, we started on the very first meeting here in lab. We talked about blood. Last week, Tuesday, we covered the endocrine system. And today, we're going to cover the lymphatic system. And that's going to cover everything. Okay, we'll be done. The lab quiz is 1 week from today. Okay. I'm seeing that some of you are having a tough time hearing me, and I'm really sorry for that. Okay, good. Some people are saying it sounds okay, because I was going to say nothing's different on my end. So if it was, I certainly would make the correction, guys. I'm sorry. Okay, so anyway, the first lab quiz is 1 week from today, next Tuesday, which will be February 3rd. Like I shared the initial lab, the lab quiz will be open from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. It is exactly the same format as you had in Bio 210, where it is going to be fill in the blank type answers, usually looking at plastic models and or microscopic histology slides, and you'll have some arrows, and you'll have to name the structure or name the hormone released from the structure, for example. Okay, so 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., fill in the blank, just like Bio 210. Just as a recap on the first lab quiz, next week, Tuesday, there are 48 questions, 13%, and we went over this last week, 13% of those questions are related to blood that we learned on the first lab session. 21% of the lab quiz questions come from today's presentation here on the lymphatic system, which leaves the vast majority, 66% of the lab quiz questions are going to come from what we covered last week, Tuesday, on the endocrine system. So just so you know how to kind of allocate your time. Once again, always, always, always study my presentations here in lab, because as I share with you when we're going through those slides, and we'll go through slides again today related to the lymphatic system, many times, first of all, anything that's on those slides is absolutely going to be on the lab quiz. Secondary is many times those slides are your actual lab quiz questions, okay? So I'm really giving you guys, I'm spoon feeding, but make sure you study the presentations from all three labs. If you do that, you will be thoroughly prepared for lab quiz number 1. There's not going to be any surprises at all. Okay? So that's the overview. One other thing that I absolutely want to stress to you, okay? And please, and I'm going to stress this again on Thursday, the last lecture that we have before we have our first lecture exam. Remember, the college has moved to an ultra heightened attention on unethical testing. And I'm not insinuating or inferring at all that any of you would ever do that, okay? I'm really not. But I just want to warn everyone up front, just so that there's nobody that's surprised by anything ever. Because from the VPs, from the chief academic officer, as the director of anatomy and physiology, I have been ordered to order all of my faculty and team that if you don't show at the beginning of the quiz, at the beginning of the exam, a 360-degree environment with your webcam, that means all the way around all four walls of the testing room and the surface top, your desktop of where you're testing. If you don't show all of that, automatically your score is a 0, no matter what. Okay? So let me say that again, because it's really important. I do not want to have to give anyone a 0. But all of your video recordings are recorded, and the Office of Academic Affairs looks at them also. So if I'm alerted that you didn't do the 360, I'm going to have to give you a 0 because I want to keep my job. Okay? So once again, at the beginning of the quiz, just like in Bio 210, you have to show your ID, whether it's your school ID, your driver's license, whichever it may be. And then it's going to prompt you for a complete environment, a 360-degree environment video. You take your webcam and you show all four walls of your testing environment and the desktop area. Again, it's for obvious reasons, right? Especially in Bio 210, we had a lot of people last semester that had notes all over their desktops and illustrations and images hung up all around the walls of their test environment. That's the reason we just want to absolutely eliminate it, and then no one in academic affairs can ever question that you were unethical. You showed your environment, you took the test, and I'll stand by you all the way to the end, as long as you do that, okay? So please don't put me in that uncomfortable situation. Don't put your grade in that uncomfortable situation. Just do it, as Nike says. Okay?
Sir, Professor, you said at the end of our test, show it too?
Nope, just at the beginning of the test.
Okay.
At the beginning of the test, right after you show your ID, respondents will tell you to use your webcam and show your testing environment.
Sir, I have a question.
Okay.
Hello.
Go right ahead.
Sir, like as you said, like we can keep the blank paper, like in case if we want to just write down the spelling just to make sure is it right or not. So
Yes.
blank paper, we can have it in the lab exams, right?
That is correct. I do not mind if you have a blank piece of paper on your desktop to help you spell things out. That's just fine. Just make sure that you show it in the video.
Just show it at the beginning. Okay.
Thank you.
Right. Just erase all doubt, guys. Okay. Think of if you were in academic affairs and you were reviewing the video, could you just eliminate any room for doubt? Okay.
And just to ask Dr. Fine, so when we writing like the word out or whatever, I know in the previous lab, sometimes it'll say you looking down too much or something. So then
Yes.
it alerts you, but then you would have seen my blank piece of paper. So that's fine, even if we're like looking down, obviously writing stuff.
Right. Absolutely. I understand, and that's a very fair point, and I'm glad you brought it up. But again, we can analyze that and see. Again, academic affairs have experts that watch these things, and they can tell if someone is, looking at another screen or something that's very, very obvious. Honestly, guys, the root of it all is we had just such blatant cheating that was going on last semester and the semester before. People were literally on an iPad and typing in things right at, and then they would type in their answer, or on their cell phone, or actively talking on a cell phone, asking a friend for an answer. You know, so I mean, it was so blatant, and that's why they're getting so strong on this. Just, you don't have to worry about it. Just make sure there's nothing in there that could be considered threatening, you know, or to get you in trouble, and you're not going to have any issues whatsoever. Okay. Don't worry about it. Just show the environment and you'll be fine. All right. Let's go ahead and let's start the content. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, guys. As we so often do here in lab, I'm going to start with a video on the lymphatic system. It's a really good overview of the lymphatic system. And again, there's going to be some duplicate content here, but this one is only about 15 minutes by the time I've eliminated it. And we only have, I think, 10 slides after that. So it's worth you staying and watching this video, because again, it's going to provide an extra layer of knowledge that's going to not only help you here on your lab quiz, but also help you to be successful over in the lecture exam. Okay, it really pays to hear these things twice. So let's go ahead and do the video. We'll come back. We'll have a few short slides to go over, and we'll have you guys on your way.
Lymphatic system. And in the first video here, we're just going to introduce the various components of the lymphatic system. And so the first thing is lymph. Okay. So what is lymph? Lymph is the fluid that's transported in lymphatic vessels. Now, lymphatic vessels, which we'll talk about in a little more detail in later videos, are very similar to arteries and veins, except they don't carry blood. So all of these strings, these green strings that you see in the legs right here, and they're, of course, elsewhere, but these are lymphatic vessels. Okay? When we typically draw them, we draw them green, even though they're not green in real life. Arteries are red, veins are typically blue, nerves are yellow. Lymphatic vessels and most lymph structures are green. So these are our lymphatic vessels, and they carry a substance called lymph. Okay? And lymph is a milky fluid similar to blood, but it contains a lot of proteins, excess fluid that has been filtered into the interstitial area, and then pathogens from tissues and the interstitium. Okay, so let's recall in blood vessel physiology, when you go to the capillary bed, and we'll talk about this more in a separate video. Here's a capillary bed. Here's an arteriole feeding the capillary bed. Here's the venule draining it. And then, of course, we have the arterial end of the capillary and the venous end of the capillary. And remember that at the arterial end of the capillary, there's a greater hydrostatic blood pressure. There's a lower hydrostatic blood pressure on the venous end. And so what that causes is on the arterial end of the capillary bed, we have net filtration, which, remember, filtration is the bulk flow of fluid and other particles, but mainly we're concerned about the fluid from the inside of these vessels that are capillaries into the interstitium, which is another term for the interstitial fluid. Now, out of the fluid that is filtered out into the interstitial areas out here, only about 85% of it is reabsorbed on the venous end of the capillary bed. Because remember, at the venous end, because the hydrostatic pressure is lower, you actually have a different process. You actually have reabsorption that occurs. And so fluid will move from the interstitium into the capillaries. But it's not a 100% efficient process. Only about 85% of that fluid that's filtered is reabsorbed. And so the question is, what happens to the other 15% that's not reabsorbed? Well, it turns out those are going to be.
My husband used to ejaculate prematurely until this. My husband is ejaculating so fast, and then you get so anxious.
Reabsorbed via lymphatic capillaries. And we'll talk more about how these capillaries eventually form vessels in one of the future videos. But for now, understand that that fluid that gets reabsorbed into the lymphatic vessels ultimately has to make its way back into the venous system. And so they're going to travel up these lymphatic vessels, and they're going to encounter other structures called lymph nodes, which we'll talk about, and ultimately get that fluid back into the venous system. Okay, so the lymphatic system is very important for, we'll look at this right now, fluid return to the blood. That's one major function of the lymphatic system. Fluid return to the blood that gets filtered but not reabsorbed by the capillaries, okay? Another important thing about lymph is that because it's draining fluid from the interstitium, it might also pick up pathogens that have managed to find their way into the interstitial regions, right? So the lymphatic system has another function, and that is mounting an immune response. And we're going to talk about that with respect to lymph nodes. So if we take a little zoom in right here, look at one of these legs, we can follow any one of these lymphatic vessels up, and eventually they're going to converge at these round structures that we see throughout the body. And they tend to be clustered in certain areas. For example, we have some popliteal ones around the knee region. We have some inguinal ones right here. There's some of the axillary regions, some of the cervical regions up here. These are called lymph nodes. And we're going to talk about lymph nodes more in the next video, but it suffices to say for now that the fluid that's moving in these lymphatic vessels is eventually going to make its way to a lymph node, okay? And the cool thing about lymph nodes is that they house white blood cells for immune responses. In fact, any one of these lymphatic organs that we're going to talk about that houses white blood cells for the purpose of mounting an immune response is termed a secondary lymphatic organ. Okay? Now, the lymph nodes, as I mentioned, collect lymph from converging lymphatic vessels, and there are white blood cells just waiting there. And they're waiting to mount an immune response against any pathogens that might be present in that lymph. So remember, that lymph is fluid drained from the interstitium, but that interstitium could contain a pathogen. And so if that pathogen manages to get into the lymph, then these lymph nodes sort of act as checkpoints. And so if a pathogen comes in there, then the white blood cells that are in there will mount an immune response against the pathogen. And we're going to see other organs of the lymphatic system, such as the spleen, some others later, that do this same thing. And again, those organs that house white blood cells for the purpose of mounting an immune response against pathogens in some kind of fluid, these are called secondary lymphatic organs, okay? Now, the pathogens that are in the lymph nodes, and of course this is going to be true of other secondary lymphatic organs, they're kind of like the TSA agents at an airport. Okay, so if you're not in the United States, I don't know exactly what you might have at your airports, but in the United States, we have TSA. And of course, we've got things like metal detectors right here. You have to send your bags through these conveyor belts that scan things, and you've got various agents here, TSA agents, that are going to check the bags and so on and so forth. So imagine you've got a bag right here, okay? And this bag is like the lymph, okay? And what the TSA agents are monitoring for are things like weapons or things that could be used as weapons, so on and so forth, to protect the passengers. And so this lymph, this baggage, has to go through several checkpoints. It has to go through the metal detectors. I think this might be one over here that corresponds to this lane. So here's a metal detector, here's another one. That's one checkpoint. And of course, we've got lots of TSA agents just waiting that are going to be checking that lymph for its contents to see if there's anything harmful. And these TSA agents are like the white blood cells. And the major two that we house in secondary lymphatic organs are B cells and T cells. Okay? So as this lymph is moving through, if there's no problems, then these agents right here aren't going to be alerted to anything if there's no issues. But if there was something harmful in this baggage, the agents are going to detect that and they're going to have a response against it, right? To protect the passengers. So it's kind of like that. Baggage is the lymph, and these agents are like the B and T cells, which are white blood cells. And if they detect something bad in the lymph, they're going to mount an immune response. Okay? And that's the function of a secondary lymphatic organ. It just so happens that the lymph nodes are monitoring the contents of the lymph for pathogens. Okay? Let's look at the spleen. So the spleen is actually right here. It's actually on the patient's left side. And the spleen has two functions. One, it's the graveyard of red blood cells. So it's responsible for degrading old, damaged red blood cells and platelets. But the spleen is also a secondary lymphatic organ. We'll talk about the spleen in more detail in another video. But understand that the spleen also contains B cells and T cells. And so, because it's not lymph that runs through the spleen, it's actually blood, the spleen's second function here in the lymphatic system is to monitor the contents of the blood. for pathogens. And so as blood is moving through the spleen, if the blood contains a pathogen, then the B cells and T cells that are just waiting there will mount an immune response against that pathogen. So the spleen is very important for blood immunity, and we would call that humoral immunity.
Sorry, guys. Remember, we have no choice but to endure the commercials.
Okay. One thing I'll also mention here, I'll come back, is the thymus. The thymus, which we can actually see right up here, the thymus is the site of T cell maturation. So in children and infants, the thymus is going to be important for producing T cells. Now, white blood cells are produced in the bone marrow, but they are matured, that is, T cells are matured in the thymus. So as a child, your thymus is very important for pumping out lots of different T cell populations. And eventually those T cells will migrate to the various secondary lymphatic organs, such as lymph nodes that we just talked about, and the spleen, and others. Once you get to adulthood, however, the thymus is going to atrophy and it will not play a role in T cell maturation anymore. The T cell maturation will actually be done in other secondary lymphatic organs, okay? But the thymus is very important for this T cell maturation in children and infants, okay? The next structure we're going to look at is what's called the cisterna chyli. The cisterna chyli is sort of like a very large lymph node. Okay? It's situated a little bit above the navel. And so what you can sort of think about with this is, if we zoom in right here, pretty much if you go to the level of the navel, pretty much every single lymph node, if you look at the efferent vessels coming off of each of these lymph nodes, they're pretty much all going to converge at the cisterna chyli. So that means pretty much all the fluid that's drained from the legs and the inguinal region right here, all of that fluid, all these vessels are going to converge at this structure right here, which is called the cisterna chyli. And it's really just a little bit above the navel level. Okay? And the purpose of the cisterna chyli is not only to act as a checkpoint, because it's also a secondary lymphatic organ and houses white blood cells, but it allows all the fluid to collect here into a common structure, and then that fluid will be transported in one larger vessel upwards. Okay? So that's the cisterna chyli. All these efferent vessels that are coming from these lymph nodes, okay, they all converge here, at least the ones that are below the cisterna chyli. If we look at the ones that are up here, they don't necessarily converge there. Okay? They actually just go straight down into a particular duct. Okay? But if we look even closer at this cisterna chyli right here, let's actually zoom in a little more, we see that it has a very large efferent vessel that comes off of it. And if we follow that upwards, we see it'll actually go behind the thymus, and then it'll kind of loop around here. And this loop right here is called the thoracic duct. That's called the thoracic duct. So we're actually going to look at what the thoracic duct does right here. The thoracic duct returns fluid to the left subclavian and internal jugular veins. So you can't see any of the veins here, but essentially the thoracic duct, which is the terminal part of the cisterna chyli's efferent vessel, that thoracic duct is going to dump that fluid back into the left subclavian and internal jugular veins. So that means that any fluid from the left leg, the right leg, really the abdominal region right here, all that fluid is going to be converged into the cisterna chyli and then moved up here through the thoracic duct and then dumped into the left subclavian vein and the left internal jugular vein. Okay? Now, there is another one that's actually not shown here. It's actually on the patient's right side, and it's called the right lymphatic duct. And it plays a similar role, except it drains a different side of the body, which we'll actually look at on the next slide. But essentially, the right lymphatic duct is going to play a very similar role to the thoracic duct, except it's going to return fluid to the right subclavian vein and the right internal jugular vein. So hopefully these two slides right here give you a good look at some of the more commonly discussed secondary lymphatic structures, and then also some pieces of the lymphatic system. Now, I mentioned that the thoracic duct is going to return fluid to the left subclavian and internal jugular veins, and the right lymphatic duct is going to do the same thing, but with the right side. So the right subclavian and right internal jugular vein. What we can talk about now is we can talk about the selective drainage by the lymphatic system. Okay? So this is kind of a nice picture right here because what it shows is the various parts of the body that are drained by a particular duct. There's the right lymphatic duct and the thoracic duct. If we look at this region right here that's kind of this off green color, we see it includes the right half of the head and neck, the right pectoral region, really just this region right here, goes on a little bit inferior to that, and then the right arm. All of these regions are drained into the right lymphatic duct. So it doesn't matter if it's the hand, the antebrachial region, the brachial region. If you look at any one of these regions contained in this off green color, all those lymphatic vessels are going to converge at lymph nodes, which are then going to converge at the right lymphatic duct. Okay? And that right lymphatic duct is going to take that fluid, that lymph, and dump it into the right subclavian vein and the right internal jugular vein. And hopefully you can see that the right lymphatic duct actually drains a minority percentage of the body. If we compare it to the thoracic duct, which is everything else in this kind of off red color, we see that the thoracic duct is going to drain a much larger region of the body. So the thoracic duct is going to drain fluid from the left side of the head, the neck, the left side of the torso, really the entire abdominal region, the left arm, and both legs. And so any fluid from here, of course, is going to go either directly to the thoracic duct, or it's going to go to the cisterna chyli, which will then go to the thoracic duct. But in any case, if any fluid goes to the thoracic duct, it's going to be returned to the left subclavian and internal jugular vein. Okay? And so one common question that we can ask about the lymphatic system is give you a particular part of the body, just point to one region. Let's say the left shoulder. And we can say which lymphatic duct drains this region. And you would have to know the various regions that are drained by each of these ducts. And of course, if I was pointing at the left shoulder, that would actually be the thoracic duct. Here's another look at this with the actual veins. Here we see the cisterna chyli down here. We see that its efferent vessel is going to go upwards, upwards. It'll actually go behind both the thymus, or what's left of it as an adult, go behind this vein right here, which is the brachiocephalic vein. That is the left one. It'll kind of loop around, and then it will dump into the left jugular vein and the left subclavian vein. Okay? The right lymphatic duct is going to be over here. Okay? And we can see, of course, that this is going to take fluid from the right side of the head, this area right here, and then the right arm, and it's going to return that fluid into the blood through the right jugular vein and the right subclavian vein. Okay? So hopefully that makes sense to you. Now, in the next video, we're going to be discussing the...
All right, so that's an overview. Guys, like I said, I know that that's a recap. I understand that for sure. But I just wanted to go ahead and show you. It's about 12 minutes. But again, keep in mind, please, that everyone in this class, and this is a double section, so we have a lot of different students, many people learn very differently. Some, again, as I've mentioned before, some learn from simply hearing things. Some learn best by reading a textbook. Some learn best by seeing video of something. So that's why I think it's worthy of investing 10 to 12 minutes to do an overview of the lymphatic system, a recap for some, sometimes an eye-opener for others. So it's worth doing, in my opinion. And certainly that's proven true in the past. So let's go ahead and talk about the specific slides from the presentation in D2L that you guys all have access to under content and then lab content. And these are all three of our lab meetings are on this first lab quiz 1 presentation is what it's called. There's a section of the slides on blood, a section on endocrine, and now a section on the lymphatic system. So let's touch on these slides and we'll be done for the day. So the lymphatic system, what I want you to know is, and I certainly would hope by this point you guys already know this, that the lymphatic system eliminates fluids and also monitors and fights infections or threats. Okay? That's what the lymphatic system is all about. All right, come on here. Well, all right. My computer's acting up. All right, so this is the illustration that I described earlier, where on my slides, you definitely want to know all of my slides. Again, one more time, and I know it's redundant, guys, but if it's on my slides, it is on the quiz with 100% certainty. Okay, so know the slides. All right, so in this case, this is an actual test question again. This is a lab quiz question. This is an illustration of what that is. I remember I told you, many of my slides are actual questions. This is one of them. You're going to see a circle or a square around this very image, around this segment of the image. And what you're going to need to know is that this is a lymphatic valve. Okay, here is the valve. This is the lymphatic vessel. Okay, and this part, and you can see, you may have to look real closely at it. The shading isn't real different than one another, but you can tell this is lighter pink right here. You can kind of see the V shape of the valve. Remember when I said that the valves help so that that lymph doesn't flow backward with gravity back down toward the toes when the muscle and artery contractions and movement help squeeze that lymph upward against gravity. These valves help to keep it from regressing. Okay, this is a lymphatic valve. I'm going to go ahead and share with you guys right now in just something to really think about. Okay, just because this is my 5th year now at the college teaching A&P. It's my first year as the director, but the 5th year of teaching, and I see repeatedly, and I'm trying to do this, guys, throughout the course. When I see a question that students repeatedly tend to get wrong, I'm going to try to emphasize it to you guys, and in an attempt to try to help you avoid falling into maybe the same pitfall that they do. Okay? All right. Read the quiz questions very thoroughly. Don't rush or let test anxiety allow you to not comprehend what the question is asking you. Okay? You, I think, are going to see a quiz question like this that's going to have just a picture, and it's going to say name the vessel type or something to that effect. And you'll say lymphatic vessel. And then you're going to have another one that's going to be this one, where it's going to clearly, and it's going to say name the special feature. And the special feature is the valve. Okay? So just make sure to slow down enough to read the question. A lot of students on this question in particular call this a lymphatic vessel, and they get it wrong because it's asking about the valve. Okay, so just slow down, word to the wise. Again, trying to steer you from harm's way before you encounter it. All right, know what the spleen is and where it is. We talked about it in lecture. I pointed out that it's parallel to the stomach on the left-hand side of the body, immediately inferior to the diaphragm and the lungs. Okay, this is the spleen. Be on the lookout for a quiz question with an illustration, very, very much like this one, that's going to say, name the lymphatic organ. Be able to tell me it's the spleen. All right. As we move more specifically into the spleen, and this is something that we didn't cover over in lecture, and we talked about what the spleen does and what its physiologic function is related to the lymphatic system. But remember, I said the whole point of the spleen is it's a red blood cell recycling center and a red blood cell graveyard, while at the same time, lymphocytes are housed there and they monitor the blood for any type of pathogens or threats. Okay. That blood, remember I outlined that it comes in via the splenic artery and exits via the splenic vein entering through the hilum. at the capsule of the spleen. Okay, once inside the spleen, there's what's called the central artery. And remember, it's all about blood filtering and blood monitoring, right? To isolate and eradicate, filter out dead or dying red blood cells, erythrocytes. They flow through the spleen internally through this central artery. And this, of course, is a microscopic histology slide. Okay, so we're just seeing a slice looking down. Here's the lumen, the opening of the central artery is this white area in the middle. This would be the arterial wall circulating here around the lumen. Okay, this is a quiz question. Know that this is asking you for when it says name the structure of the spleen, be able to tell me it's the central artery. All right, also related to the spleen and another histology image and another test question that you're being given. Okay, so here's that central artery once again, different histology image this time. Okay, here we can see the arterial wall circling around it. Okay, and we see the lumen here, the hollow opening in the middle. Okay, then around that, we have the tissue that actually acts as the filter to, remember, filter out red blood cells that are either decomposing or are already dead. Okay, remember, the spleen is the red blood cell graveyard. Okay, so what actually does the filtering is called pulp. Okay, this is like the sponge part of the spleen that does the physical actual filtering. Okay, so we have the white pulp and then the red pulp are the two types of sponge-like inner substance that filters the blood within the spleen. All right, so it's the white pulp that stains on a histology image darker purple, as you can see, whereas the red pulp further out is a little bit more pale in color. Okay, so know the difference between the two. It's the white pulp that's darker on a stained image, these granules. If you are looking at a blood cell, these look like granules that would make this a granulocyte, but it's the spleen. But the white pulp, the granules, the sponge-like inner consistency stains a darker purple. The red pulp stains a much lighter shade, okay, like a whitish pink. Okay, also know what they do, like this slide says. The red pulp filters the blood, whereas the white pulp produces the white blood cells that are going to monitor the blood. Okay, so that's what I want you to take away from this slide for the lab quiz. All right, back to the lymphatic, the lymph nodes and those areas where they cluster that we talked about. Remember, it was inguinal, the groin, axillary, the underarm areas, and cervical, the neck. Okay, those are the three primary areas in the human body, the anatomic regions where lymph nodes tend to cluster, where there's a heavy presence or grouping of them. Know for your lab quiz the axillary area and the cervical area as being high concentration or clustering areas of lymph nodes. That's a recap from lecture. This is a new one, okay? This is a histology image, a microscopic image of a lymph node, a cutaway of a lymph node, so just a slice of a lymph node tissue, okay? Within the lymph node proper, the whole lymph node, there are these little circular areas, fairly round areas that stain a darker purple within the lymph node itself. These are called germinal centers, okay? It is these germinal centers, and you can see this is a quiz question again. Name the structure at the arrows. Be able to say germinal centers, okay? And then anticipate, because it's on my slide, like I said, there's nothing on my slides that you don't need to know, okay? know that there's going to be a second part of this question that's going to say, name the structure at the arrows. And then the second part, part B, would be, and what they do. And that's to proliferate or create lymphocytes. This is where lymphocytes multiply within lymph nodes. Okay? Remember we said within the lymph nodes, lymphocytes hang out, monitor, and filter, and they proliferate, they multiply. It's here within these subcomponents of the lymph nodes, these germinal centers, is where the lymph nodes multiply. You don't have to say proliferate, okay? You can just put that they multiply, or that, you know, that they're created. Whatever you put, I'll give you credit for, okay? As long as you've got the gist of what it is. It's where they're formed, where they multiply. All right, 2 more slides, and that's it. Like I said, there's not a lot on the lymphatic system, only 21% of the quiz. This is, again, something that we talked about over in lecture. We talked about Peyer's patches, right? And we talked about them being embedded in the walls of the small intestine to surveil and monitor our mashed up food that's been digested before it crosses the small intestine membrane and into the capillaries to be transported throughout the body in our blood, right? That's the recap from lecture. Now, so know for the lab quiz, and this is again the exact image you're going to see. This is the quiz question. When it says name this feature of lymphatic tissue, be able to identify these as Peyer's patches. Okay, that these are Peyer's patches, and that Peyer's patches monitor the digestive system. And the last one, but not least, we talked about the tonsils, the mucose-associated lymphatic tissue, and the 3 varieties thereof. The pharyngeal tonsils, also called adenoids. Either name is acceptable on the quiz, by the way. The palatine tonsils at the back of the oral cavity. The pharyngeal is at the back of the nasal cavity. All of this is the pharynx. And then we have the lingual tonsils, which are right underneath and at the posterior of the tongue. Okay, so know the 3 varieties of tonsils from a plastic model, be able to identify them on the lab quiz. And like I said, for pharyngeal, you can say pharyngeal or adenoids. Either one is fine with me. Okay? That's it, guys. Those are your quiz questions that you're going to encounter on lab quiz number 1 related to the lymphatic system. There's only 8 slides. Some of them have 2 parts. Okay. One more thing that I realized during the video that I didn't reiterate to you, and I just want to share it. Just again, my effort is 100% to help you guys to be successful. Okay. Please, please, and I know most of you probably experienced this at one time or another on a lab quiz in Bio 210, especially on those bones and muscles quizzes. Be very, very cautious. Slow down. Read the quiz questions well to make sure that you're understanding what the question is asking you, first and foremost. And then the second part to that is make sure where there's a 2-part answer, an A and a B, make sure that you're putting the answer for A in the A slot on the quiz and the answer for B in the B slot for the quiz. A lot of people are rushing through the quiz, and it's maybe test taking anxiety, whatever it may be. But a lot of people put the A answer in the B spot and the B answer in the A spot, and then that's wrong. Okay. One of the critical functional tasks that you have to be able to excel at in healthcare in order to keep a job in the healthcare field is attention to detail, okay, and spelling. And those 2 things, and that's why we hyper emphasize putting the right answer in the right spot, because that is attention to detail that you are absolutely going to need to be able to complete on a day in and day out basis when you get out into the healthcare field. Okay, we'd be doing you a disservice if we let you slide. Okay, so that's why we are strict about certain things. It's to prepare you so that when you get out in the field, you're ready to go. Okay. All right. So that's it. That's it for lab. That's it for the content for the first lab quiz. Once again, 1 week from today is lab quiz number 1. We will not, remember, we do not meet for lab when we have a lab quiz. We do not meet for lecture when we have a lecture exam, or if it's a study day, for example. Okay. Again, consult your calendars. All of it spelled out there for you. Okay. Any questions on what we covered here in lab, specifically related to the slides that I just showed you?
I have a question
I have a
concerning.
question.
Sorry, you go ahead first.
Basically this whole review for the quiz is just in the content, right?
It's the slide presentation. Right. The slides are where you should hyper focus to prepare for the lab quiz.
I couldn't hear you. Can you repeat? I'm sorry.
Yes. My slides are the content that you should be hyper focused on for the lab quiz prep.
Yeah, I was just making sure I knew where to locate them.
Yep, they're in D2L where I showed you on day 1. They're in D2L under content.
Okay, thank you.
You're very, very welcome. And I think I had one more question, maybe.
Oh, yes, sir. I have a question concerning the lab quiz.
Yes.
Last semester when I took 210, and on the lab quiz, when they showed the arrow to what we had to put, what featured it was or what structure it was. So therefore, when I was reviewing the lab slides from the teacher from last semester, the first letter was capitalized, and if the feature, the first letter was capitalized. Now, do we have to say, for instance, if it says, what is this feature? The spleen. I mean, yeah, no, I'm sorry. What is the structure? The spleen. Do we have to capitalize the S, or can we just do SPLEEN? Write it like that, or do we have to capitalize the S and get credit for it?
I'm glad that you brought that up. I am not worried about capitalization whatsoever. Okay. Just give me the right word and spell it really, really close or perfectly, and you're going to be great. I'm not worried about capitalization, but I'm glad that you asked the question.
All right, thank you.
Again, good thing to bring up.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, guys, that's it for today. Like I said, as you know, we don't take attendance here in lab. I take it in lecture because it's immediately before this, and I teach both sections, so that satisfies the need for attendance. I will go ahead and very shortly dive into returning those emails to you to let you know that your extra credit has been earned, and I will see you guys Thursday, and we'll wrap up with the immune system in detail of how immunology works, how those T cells and B cells differentiate further out, what they attack, etc. It's going to be a very detail-oriented lecture. Don't miss lecture, and we'll see you then. Have a great couple of days.
Thank you.
You too.
Nice.